You cannot stop the tide from coming in, and you cannot stop the truth from finally being told to the world. Witness the rising power of justice as it washes away the lies of the past. Hit subscribe now and be part of the wave that changes everything.
She abandoned this child for 3 years to chase some fantasy career that doesn't exist, my mother-in-law told the judge, her voice cracking with practiced grief. She is not a mother. She is a ghost who shows up when it's convenient. I did not move. I did not blink. I kept my hands folded on the table in front of me, and I breathed through it, the way I had learned to breathe through a lot of things, through 18-hour shifts, through failed grant applications, through the particular silence of a house where someone has stopped loving you but hasn't said it out loud yet. My name is Claire Ashford, I am 33 years old, and according to the man sitting across the aisle from me in courtroom 4B of the Suffolk County Probate and Family Court, I am an unfit mother, a chronic liar, and a woman who cannot hold a job. His name is my ex-husband. I spent 6 years calling him the person I trusted most in the world. I spent the last 14 months watching him use that trust as ammunition. My daughter is 7, her name is Nora. She has his dark hair and my stubbornness and a laugh that sounds like a bell rolling down a hill. She is the reason I'm sitting in this room right now, next to my attorney, listening to his mother describe me as a parasite in a gray blazer. The sealed envelope in my attorney's bag is small. It is not dramatic to look at. It is not black or embossed with eagles. It is just a standard 9x12 manila envelope with a green routing sticker from the National Institutes of Health. But inside it is a document that is going to end this hearing very differently than my ex-husband planned. He does not know it exists. Not yet. Have you ever had someone look at your entire life and decide they understand it better than you do? Have you ever sat in a room where every fact about who you are has been filtered through someone else's version of you, polished and sharpened and pointed directly at your throat? Tell me in the comments. Because I need to know I'm not the only one who has sat in that chair. My ex-husband's name is Derek. We met when I was 26, both of us at a conference in Philadelphia. He was finishing his MBA. I was presenting a research paper on cortical repair mechanisms following traumatic brain injury, though I was introduced at that conference under my publishing name, which is not the name on my driver's license or my marriage certificate. I've used a pen name for my academic work since I was 22 years old, a decision I made after a senior colleague stole the methodology from my undergraduate thesis and published it under his own name before I could file. My advisor told me to let it go. I decided instead to become invisible in a different way, present in the work, absent from the target. Derek did not attend my panel. We met at the hotel bar afterward and I did not tell him about the paper, because that night I was tired of being a researcher and I just wanted to be a person having a drink with someone who made her laugh. We talked for 4 hours. I flew home believing in things I had stopped believing in. We were married 2 years later. The version of me Derek knew was real. I cooked badly and loved fiercely and read 3 books at once and fell asleep watching nature documentaries. What I did not tell him, not because I was ashamed, but because the security clearance attached to my NIH contract required compartmentalization, was the full scope of what I did for a living. I told him I was a medical research consultant, that my clients were institutions, not individuals, that my work was published under a different name for professional reasons. He said he understood. For 2 years, I believed he did. Then I became pregnant with Nora, and something shifted in Derek that I could not name at the time. He started asking about money differently. Not just how much I made, but where it went, who it came from, why there was no LinkedIn profile, why I didn't show up in his mother's Google searches. His mother, Margaret, had opinions about everything, and her opinion about me solidified somewhere around Nora's first birthday into something I can only describe as a verdict. She decided I was a fraud. Not a liar, exactly. Not a bad person. Just a woman who had inflated herself into something she wasn't and who had tricked her son into marrying the inflation. She had grown up in a world where a woman's credibility came from visibility. You went to the right school. You worked at the place whose name people recognized. You showed up at the charity gala and let people take your picture. My world worked the opposite way. My credibility was built precisely on not being seen. Margaret could not find me anywhere. And what she could not find, she decided did not exist. By the time Nora was 3, Derek had started borrowing her vocabulary. My career was a fantasy. My research was a hobby. My income was a mystery, which in his mother's translation meant a fabrication. When I presented Derek with my actual employment contract, redacted in the places required by my NDA, he told me it looked fake. When I showed him a single published paper listed under my pen name, he said anyone could put words on a page. We separated 14 months ago. It was not dramatic. It was just the slow recognition that I was living inside someone else's story about me, and that story had no room for the truth. Derek filed for full custody 8 weeks later. His petition cited my inability to demonstrate stable employment, my frequent travel, and what he described as my pattern of evasiveness regarding my professional activities. His attorney was a man named Philip Garrett who had 30 years of family court experience and a way of making everything sound inevitable. My attorney was a woman named Joanna Park. She had 12 years of experience, a quiet reputation, and a contact at the NIH Office of General Counsel that she had never had reason to use before she took my case. She had reason now. The hearing had been going for 2 hours when Margaret took the stand. She was 61 years old, and she wore the expression of a woman who had been waiting a very long time for an audience. She described me as a drifter who had married her son under false pretenses. She said that in 6 years of marriage, she had never once been able to verify a single claim I made about my professional life. She said she had hired an investigator who found no employer records, no corporate listings, no public professional profiles. She said, her voice dropping into something carefully sad, that she believed I was a woman living off the generosity of an institution that did not have a name, doing work that could not be described, for reasons that had never been made clear to anyone. She is not stable, Margaret said. A child needs stability. Nora deserves a home where she knows who her mother is. I watched Derek while his mother spoke. He was sitting with his hands clasped on the table, and he looked like a man who had already written the ending. He had told his version of my life to so many people for so long that I think he had started to believe it himself. That is the thing about deciding someone is a ghost. Eventually you stop being able to see them, even when they are standing right in front of you. Philip Garrett stood and smoothed his jacket. He had the manner of a man who found most things beneath him but endured them professionally. Ms. Ashford, he said, turning to face me from across the room, can you provide this court with your employer's name, physical address, and a single verifiable record of compensation received in the last calendar year? Not a redacted document, not an NDA-protected summary. Something this court can independently confirm. I looked at him. Then I looked at the judge. Her name was Judge Patricia Wren. She was 54 years old, she had been on the Suffolk County bench for 11 years, and she had, as far as I could tell, been listening to this entire proceeding with an expression I could not read. My employment is governed by a non-disclosure agreement and a federal research contract, I said. The records exist. The compensation exists. My inability to hand you a pay stub with a letterhead is a function of my contract's security requirements, not a function of the records not existing. Garrett smiled. It was the smile of a man who had heard this kind of answer before and knew exactly what to do with it. Security requirements, he said, letting the words sit there. Ms. Ashford, you are asking this court to accept, on faith, that you have a career that appears to have no footprint, no verifiable employer, no public record of any kind. You are asking a judge to award you shared custody of a 7-year-old child based on a career that, for all the court can determine, exists only in your description of it. He let that land. I watched 2 people on the benches behind Derek nod. My daughter knows exactly who I am, I said. Your daughter is 7, Garrett replied. She knows what she's been told. That was the moment the anger moved through me, not hot, not the kind that makes you raise your voice, the kind that goes perfectly still, the way a lav goes still right before a result comes back, that changes everything. I thought about the morning 2 years ago when Derek's mother called me, crying, because her oncologist had told her the immunotherapy protocol she needed wasn't covered by her insurance. I thought about the 48 hours I spent on the phone with 3 different hospital billing departments, and the research contact I called in a favor from, and the $38,000 that moved from my research consulting account into a patient assistance fund that Margaret never knew was mine. I thought about how she stood up at Thanksgiving that same year and thanked God for providing. I had sat across from her and said nothing because I did not do it for her gratitude. I did it because she was Nora's grandmother and Nora needed her grandmother to be alive. I thought about Derek's startup, the logistics software company he had launched 3 years into our marriage with 2 friends and a business plan he'd written in our kitchen. I thought about the $52,000 I had moved through a private investment vehicle to cover his first-year operating costs when his initial funding fell through. He thought it came from an angel investor his business partner had found. He had never questioned it because he had not wanted to question it. He had just needed the money to exist. I had been the invisible hand keeping their world intact, and here they were, using my invisibility as the knife. Derek's attorney called his next witness, a forensic financial analyst named Stephen Cole, who had been hired to review the financial records Derek had submitted to the court. Cole was precise and pleasant, and he spoke with the confidence of someone who had prepared very thoroughly for a testimony he believed was going to be decisive. The financial records submitted by Mr. Ashford indicate that during the marriage, a significant portion of household income was deposited from a source identified only as NRC Consulting Partners, Cole said. My research indicates that NRC Consulting Partners is not registered with the Massachusetts Secretary of State, has no public-facing website, and does not appear in any commercial database I was able to access. I was unable to verify that this entity exists as a legitimate employer. He paused, looked at his notes, and looked back up. Additionally, the investment vehicle that provided $52,000 to Mr. Downs, Ashford's company, Greyline Systems, in its first operating year, that vehicle traces back to the same unverifiable source. My conclusion is that the financial documentation provided by Ms. Ashford does not meet the standard of verifiable income and raises questions about the legitimate origin of these funds. He did not say the word fraud, he was too careful for that, but the word was there, sitting in the air between his sentences, and I watched Derek absorb it with the look of a man who had not fully expected this ammunition, but was not going to refuse it now that it had been handed to him. Your own startup, I said quietly, to no one in particular. Ms. Ashford. Judge Wren's voice was measured. Please direct your comments through your attorney. I nodded. Joanna put her hand briefly on my arm. Garrett stood again. He was almost comfortable now. He had the rhythm of a man wrapping up a case he considered already decided. Your Honor, the plaintiff has presented a pattern of financial opacity that, combined with the documented absence of verifiable employment, raises serious concerns about the defendant's fitness as a primary caregiver. Mr. Ashford is asking this court to consider the stability of the environment in which Nora lives. The evidence suggests Mr. Garrett. Judge Wren's voice cut cleanly through the sentence. I would like to hear from Ms. Ashford's attorney before you conclude. Joanna stood. She was not a theatrical person. She did not use her voice the way Philip Garrett used his, as a performance designed to fill a room. She used it the way a scalpel is used, with precision and no wasted movement. Your Honor, Joanna said, the plaintiff's investigation was conducted using public databases and commercial search tools. That investigation was thorough by those standards. However, it was designed to find a person who, under the terms of a federal research agreement with the National Institutes of Health, is explicitly required to maintain a limited public professional profile. My client has been operating under those terms for 11 years. The records exist. The employment is real. And because the plaintiff has introduced financial documentation into these proceedings that mischaracterizes the source and legitimacy of my client's income, my client has been granted a limited disclosure waiver by the NIH Office of General Counsel. Joanna reached into her bag. She produced the envelope. It was not dramatic. It was just an envelope. But I watched Philip Garrett look at the routing sticker on its face, and I watched him stop moving. We would like to submit for the court's review a verified statement of employment and research affiliation, authorized for judicial review under NIH confidentiality protocol. This document confirms my client's continuous employment, confirms the legitimate corporate structure of NRC Consulting Partners, and clarifies the nature of the investment made in Greyline Systems. Garrett found his voice. Your Honor, this is procedurally irregular. A sealed document introduced at this stage. Mr. Garrett, Judge Wren said. Sit down. He sat. She accepted the envelope from the court officer. She used a letter opener from her desk drawer slowly, and the room went to a particular kind of quiet that I have only experienced a few times in my life. The quiet of a room that does not yet know it is about to change directions entirely. Judge Wren read. I did not watch her face while she read. I watched Derek. He was still sitting with his hands clasped, but his jaw had changed. It had gone from set and certain to something tighter, the expression of a man who can feel a foundation shifting but cannot yet identify where the crack is coming from. Margaret, in the gallery behind him, had stopped nodding. Judge Wren read the document again. I knew what was on it. I had read the authorization before Joanna sealed it. I had read the part that listed my 11-year affiliation with the NIH's National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Stroke. I had read the part that confirmed my publication record under my pen name, 43 peer-reviewed papers, 2 of which had been cited in FDA guidance documents. I had read the part that described NRC Consulting Partners as a properly established research entity operating under federal confidentiality requirements, incorporated in Delaware, with a 10-year tax history. And I had read the single paragraph at the bottom, which Joanna had worked for 3 weeks to get included, confirming that the $52,000 investment in Greyline Systems had been made from my personal post-tax research income through a legitimate private investment vehicle, and that the source of those funds was fully documented in records available to the IRS. Judge Wren set the document on her desk. She removed her reading glasses and held them in one hand. She looked at me for a long moment, and I thought I saw something shift in her expression, not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The look of someone who has just revised an assumption they did not know they were making. She looked at Derek. Then she looked at Philip Garrett in a way that made him straighten in his chair. "Mr. Garrett," Judge Wren said, "you have built a custody case on the premise that this mother is professionally invisible. You have implied, through your financial analyst's testimony, that the source of her income is illegitimate. You have suggested to this court that she is evasive, unstable, and fundamentally unverifiable." She paused. "I have before me a verified statement from the National Institutes of Health confirming that Claire Ashford has been a continuously employed, federally contracted research scientist for 11 years. Her publishing record is extensive. Her income is documented and taxed. Her financial support of her ex-husband's company was legal, disclosed to the IRS, and came entirely from her own earnings." The room did not go cold. It went very, very still. "The blank spaces in her professional record," Judge Wren continued, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who does not need to raise it to be heard, "are not evidence of her instability. They are the terms of a federal agreement she has honored for over a decade. She was not hiding from this court. She was complying with a contract that predates this marriage, this divorce, and this hearing." Derek's jaw was open. Not dramatically, just slightly, the way a face goes when the ground moves under it. Margaret, in the gallery, had both hands pressed flat against her knees. "Ms. Ashford," the judge said. "Yes, Your Honor. Your daughter is lucky to have a mother who takes her commitments seriously." She let that settle. "Mr. Garrett, I am denying the petition for modified custody. Primary residential custody will remain with the mother as previously ordered. I am additionally awarding Ms. Ashford $28,000 in legal fees to be paid by the plaintiff, given that this proceeding was initiated on the basis of claims that a reasonable investigation would have identified as unfounded." She looked at the financial analyst, who was now studying his notepad with great concentration. "And Mr. Cole, I would encourage you, before your next engagement, to consider that the absence of public information is not the same as the absence of legitimate information." Garrett started to rise. Judge Wren's eyes moved to him, and he stopped. "I would also note for the record," she said, "that the $38,000 provided to Margaret Ashford's medical care through a patient assistance fund 2 years ago has been traced in this court's documentation to an account affiliated with NRC Consulting Partners." She paused. "I am not making a legal finding about that transaction. I am simply noting that the record is more complete than the plaintiff appeared to believe." Margaret made a sound I had never heard her make before. It was very small, and it was not a word. Derek turned to look at his mother. She did not look back at him. I did not feel the particular rush I'd imagined for this moment when I lay awake at 2 a.m. for the past several months rehearsing it. I did not feel triumphant. I felt clean, the way you feel after setting down something you have been carrying for so long you forgot you were carrying it. Joanna touched my elbow. "We're done here," she said quietly. I nodded. I stood. I gathered my bag. As I moved toward the aisle, Derek said my name. Just once. The way someone says a word when they're not sure what sentence to attach it to. I stopped. I did not turn around immediately. I stood for 1 full second in the aisle of courtroom 4B, and I thought about every dinner where Margaret had implied I wasn't good enough without saying it directly. Every conversation where Derek had asked me to explain myself and then explained away my explanation. Every morning I had driven Nora to school after working half the night on a research revision and listened to her talk about her friends and her teacher and her theory about why clouds move and thought, this is the only thing that matters. This child who does not need me to be famous or legible or visible to anyone but her. I turned around. Derek looked older than he had at the start of this hearing. Not older in years. Older in the way that people look when an assumption has collapsed and they haven't found a new one to stand on yet. "She was in the fund?" he said. The question was barely voiced. He was asking about his mother. "She was in the fund," I said. "You never told us? You weren't asking questions because you wanted to know me?" I said. "You were accepting the answers that fit." "There's a difference." He opened his mouth, closed it. "Derek." I held his gaze. "I'm going to go pick up our daughter from school in 2 hours. She is going to tell me about her day and I am going to listen to every word. You should do the same thing on your days. That's all she needs from either of us. I walked out through the heavy door into the marble corridor. The light in the hallway was flat and institutional, and it smelled like old paper and floor wax, and I stood in it for a moment and just breathed. Joanna came through the door behind me. She did not say congratulations, she handed me my coat. The NIH contact wants to do a debrief next week, she said. They want to assess exposure from the disclosure. I know, I said. I'll call them this afternoon. She nodded. You all right? I thought about it. Really thought about it, the way you can only do in the 5 seconds after something enormous is just resolved. I'm all right, I said. I took the elevator down to the lobby and walked out into the October air, which was cold and clean and smelled like wet pavement and someone's coffee. I sat in my car for a few minutes before I started it. I looked at my phone and there was a text from Nora's school, a photo her teacher had sent of Nora standing proudly in front of a poster she'd made about the water cycle. She had drawn the clouds with great attention to detail and labeled the arrows in her best handwriting: evaporation, condensation, precipitation. Underneath, in different color marker, she had written her own annotation: the water keeps going. It never gets used up. I looked at that for a long time. There is a particular kind of courage that has no audience. It does not get photographed or applauded or confirmed by anyone who matters. It is the courage of doing the work in the dark, of maintaining your own record in a world that refuses to acknowledge it, of staying honest about what you are when everyone around you has agreed on a different version. It does not come with a ceremony. Sometimes it does not come with recognition at all. Sometimes the only witness is a sealed envelope in a manila folder that sits in a filing cabinet until the day someone finally decides to open it. I started the car. I had 2 hours before school pickup. I had a research revision due Thursday and 3 emails I had been putting off and 1 phone call I had been putting off longer. I had a daughter who needed a mother who showed up, not just in courtrooms but in kitchens and carpool lines and Saturday mornings when everything is slow and nobody is watching. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed north. The city was ordinary around me. Traffic and construction and the particular gray-blue of a Boston October sky, and I thought, I was never the ghost they described. I was here the whole time. I was always here. They just refused to look. The pin on my lanyard, a small NIH enamel logo I've worn since my first research contract, caught the afternoon light as I turned onto the expressway. I unclipped it and held it for a moment. Then I put it back on. Some things you wear because they remind you who you are, not for anyone else. Just for you. Just so that when someone tries to hand you their version of your life, you have something solid to hold on to. Nora's poster was still on my phone screen when I stopped at the light. The water keeps going. It never gets used up. She was 7 years old and she had already figured out the most important thing. If you've ever been told that your silence meant you had nothing to say or that your invisibility meant you had nothing to offer, leave a comment below. This community is for the people who do the work in the dark and never ask for a standing ovation. Like and subscribe if you want to hear what happens next.